About 50 minutes ago, I started getting reports. I think the first one to do it that was serious was Sky News Arabia, of reports of explosions in areas around Iran that there are nuclear facilities in. And because of the fact that Iran said that they would respond to the Israeli, that Israel said they would respond to the Iranian attack on Israel with the missiles after the Israeli attack on the consulate, which we're just finding out that the Israelis did not, according to Israeli officials, they did not consider a provocation, and they did not warn the United States in advance of, which I would say is definitely one way to continue to sour American-Israeli relations. If you want us to come along in this gallivanting campaign across the Middle East, into Syria or into Iran itself, the situation has escalated further, because as we were getting those reports, we started to think, oh God, this is a direct strike by Israel on Iran. Is this a direct strike on Israel by Iran? It very well could be, but I didn't want to engage in speculation, and so I waited and waited and waited. I said Sky News Arabia is usually reliable. It doesn't usually just throw out complete misinformation. So let's wait and see, though, for more sources. And then ABC News and CBC, I believe it's NBC, ABC, and now CNN and the American government has all come out and said that the Israelis have struck Iran, presumably around Iranian nuclear facilities, which would presumably, and again, there's a lot of this is speculation. We have a bunch of sources confirming the Israelis have struck Iran. About what exactly was struck, we still don't know. We got reports of big explosions, but it would be presumably, since it's in the area of the Iranian nuclear program, to target the Iranian nuclear program, possibly to cripple it in retaliation for Iranian attempts to strike Israel directly, maybe to reassure deterrence. If Israel believes that they had to strike Iran directly after their attempts to strike them, after they struck the consulate in Syria, which diplomatically under international law would be considered Iranian territory, up this escalation ladder, they would maybe they feel that if they didn't do this, that the Iranians would believe that, oh, we can attack Israel directly and not get much of a response. Now, I would have made the argument, but of course, I'm just me, that after blowing up the consulate, killing a high-ranking IRGC official, which is, in this consulate, is considered Iranian international territory, that they could have basically have looked at that, the Iranians, like, they struck us once, we tried to strike them once. And the Israelis got the better end of the stick there. They killed a high-ranking IRGC official, killed some others. The Iranians, at the end of the day, even though they fired like 300 projectiles, drones, missiles, etc., the only thing they ended up doing was injuring a 7-year-old girl. Terrible for the girl, but certainly did not undermine Israel's strategic capabilities. And the Iranians basically said, okay, that's what we did. That was our strike. And then the ball was passed to the Israelis. And now we're getting an idea of what their response is going to be. Whether it was to reassure deterrence, I don't know. It's hard for me, and I've been saying this for a while, to figure out where Israel's geopolitical interests lay and political interests lay of the ruling Netanyahu government, considering they're very unpopular and that their coalition is built on the fringes. And if they were to have another election right now, which the majority of Israelis want an election in the near future, if not now, then after the war, it would not end well for Netanyahu, who is a surviving prime minister, longest prime ministership of any Israeli prime minister. Not longest prime ministership, but the longest serving prime minister in Israeli history. So it's hard for me to know if it would be a strike on Iran specifically to, try to respond and get deterrence and to make them say, if you strike Israel, we will strike Iran proper, or attempt to strike Israel, we will strike Iran proper, not just what is considered Iranian territory under under international law. Or if it's Netanyahu thinking, wartime president gives me an excuse to not have elections. It could be a combination of both. It's hard for me to assume intentions, and so I will not assume intentions, and I'll just give you the multiple different lenses you could view this from. Either way, flights started to get diverted, and we're just sticking to the CNN stuff because I don't want to go through all the anonymous Twitter accounts like, oh, Mario Newfall, the #1 name in news. Now, I want to stick to sources that are more respectable. Explosions heard near Iran's airport. Iranian news agencies report an explosion was heard in the Iranian city of, we're just going to call it Ga because, located northwest city of Ashrafan. I tried. According to the Iranian semi-official Fars news agency, citing local sources. By the way, I butcher all languages, but I swear to God, I butcher the English language more than any other. So For anybody who speaks Farsi or anybody who speaks Ukrainian, you can rest assured by that. The city is located near the airport and the 8th hunting base of the Army Air Force, Fars says. Iranian Press TV, which is state media, also reported an explosion was heard near the central city. The cause of the explosion is unknown. Iran says flights to Tehran and these other cities are suspended. All flights heading to the cities of Tehran, Isfahan, and Shariz, the airports of West, Northwest, and Southwest, have been suspended. The director of Iran's public relations for an airport company announced in an interview with state-run Mir TV. The suspension is effective immediately, but flights have not been canceled, the director said. Passengers should check the flight information before departure. So we don't have any information about what was struck yet.
Archipelago got a tier 3 subscription.
Either way, though, it looks like what many people feared is here, an Israeli strike on Tehran and on many other locations in Iran, but basically an Israeli strike on Iran. Now, man, I don't even know where to begin here. I guess the first thing I would do is say that there are going to be people now who are going to scream from the rooftops that World War III has begun. And I want to tell you that that's not necessarily true. While it's not impossible that this could escalate into a war, number one, it wouldn't necessarily be a world war if it did. And number two, it hasn't escalated that necessarily yet. The Iranians tried to strike Israel, largely failed. The Israelis tried to strike back. Looks like they've had more success than the Iranians had. But that is different than a full-blown declared war between the two countries where they're going all guns blazing. The axis, Iran's so-called axis of resistance, and Hezbollah and other organizations are going balls to the wall, firing everything they have. The Israelis put their nuclear weapons on high alert, and they start doing sortie after sortie after sortie, trying to disable Iranian air defense so then they can strike the other storage facilities for their weapons and their military bases, etc. I want to give that warning because I fear the grifters are going to try to dominate the airspaces and the Twitter spaces and the YouTubes and the Spotifys and the radios and the TV stations very quickly. So the first thing I want to tell you guys is this is dangerous territory when it comes to escalation. I don't want to undersell it. This is a potential point for continued escalation as the Iranians are going to want to respond in some way. Likely, whether it is another attempt to strike Israel, whether it be an attempt on an Israeli consulate, whether it would be something else, I don't know. But this is a real moment where I'm kind of holding my breath. Really holding my breath. But do not let the fearmongers take over your mind. Something that's really scary about nuclear planning is trying to adjust for the idea of waiting in case of error, miscommunication that could stop a war. There have been many close calls in nuclear non-proliferation where people thought nuclear war was here. They waited a little bit. It was like, oh, there was just a malfunction. But the problem with waiting is the longer you wait, if actually nuclear war has begun, the more likely that you basically lose, because time is of the essence in a war where the whole full destructive capacity of a decade-long conflict is condensed into a 24 time period through the sheer power of the sun being thrown into population centers. It's terrifying. And so you want to get with it so you can try to get those first strikes. And so there could be, not only just due to either the Israeli government stumbling into a war, the Iranian government stumbling into a war, the escalation ladder getting out of control, miscommunication, but a fear that the operations have already begun. Maybe if it's not nuclear operations, even though Israel is a nuclear power and Iran is trying to become a nuclear power, that, oh, all these strikes have begun, so I got to start getting my stuff off before they disable all my rockets. Because if Israel starts disabling all of Iranian rocket storage facilities, then they're going to think, well, better fire them off before they destroy them all. The same thing could be true of Hezbollah in southern Lebanon, for example. And this also applies vice versa. So there's a lot of points for escalation. Fear of missing out on an opportunity, possible political motivations, the ability of trying to continue to probe the Iranians to see how far they would go. There's so many different angles here that make this dangerous. But again, the idea that we've reached a point of no return where we're all going to die, if we accept that conclusion, then I would say that I would say that there's a risk of creating a self-fulfilling prophecy. And that's something I certainly do not want. The United States does not want a regional war. I don't think the Iranians want a regional war. Honestly, I don't think most Israelis want a regional war. Netanyahu specifically, I'm a little bit more divided on. But I think that is the interest of all parties when it comes to the geopolitical interest. Maybe not political interest, geopolitical interest, and the interest of their people and state is to avoid a war. And so the idea that we've reached a point of no return, I want to reject that. That there isn't still a way for this to go down the escalation ladder. There was a way for this to go down the escalation ladder on the Israeli side. They could have instead, after the attack on Israel, decided to continue what they've been doing for 12 years and strike some Hezbollah facilities or strike some facilities in Syria, which doesn't have any, I guess, air power to stop the Israelis from doing that, which they've already been doing for the better part of 12 years now. And that could be a way of showing that they will still target Iranian strategic assets in the region while also not continuing to go up the escalation ladder. I mean, they took out a high-ranking IRGC commander in the consulate when they struck it. The Iranians were unable to really get much done, if anything, through their attack on Israel. They could have come out of this, I think, taking the general plus out of the situation. They got the general strategic or tactical, maybe tactical is a better word, benefit from the situation. But I guess either for reasons of wanting to make deterrence clear or political reasons or trying to take advantage of the opportunity that the war provides to degrade strategic ability or to probe the Iranians, whatever it may be, the Israelis have bombed Iran. And so now, once more of this clears up, and we don't know all the details yet. The details are still crawling in. We just got a new update. Iran's air defense systems have been activated in several provinces. Iran's air defenses have been activated in several provinces of the country. State News IRNA reported in the early hours of Friday local time. I've seen some footage that was supposedly released by the IRGC. I don't know if I want to put anything on screen right now because I'm trying to be very careful about confirming stuff. Now the ball is going to be passed into Iran's court, and there's a lot we don't know yet. We don't know exactly what has been damaged. We don't know who exactly has been killed. We don't know how much has been intercepted, how much got through. We don't know really anything. All we know, according to U.S. officials and others, is that Israel's bombed Iran. We have a list of cities, and there's likely a nuclear component, as in targeting of the Iranian nuclear program, due to the local locations of these cities. But this is an assumption I am making, and I want to highlight that that is an assumption. That is not something we know for sure. And so with that information and knowing that the ball has been passed back into Iran's court, again, there are other ways to de-escalate the situation where the Iranians, instead of doing another direct strike on Israel, could try to strike Israeli assets elsewhere. Or instead of doing a direct physical strike on Israel, they do a massive cyber attack or some sort of cyber attack instead to try to reassure deterrence. Would that be considered a direct attack in Israel in the same way? I don't know. I really don't know. But they could find ways to not do what they just did with the 300 rockets or go further in order to try to de-escalate the ladder. But the ball has been put in their court, and the Iranians are going to feel pressure, especially from the hardliners in the government, who, I mean, after the Obama administration's deal, the Iran deal sunk, have been more empowered. They're going to be calling for a strong response. They're going to be saying that Iran has been attacked. Iran is at threat. Their national security, their question of their existential survival is being thrown into the air. And in order to deter the Israelis, just like they did the strike on Israel the first time, in order to try to deter future strikes on the consulate. I mean, that was a strike on the consulate, which is internationally considered part of Iran, but this is Iran proper. They might come to the conclusion, instead of 300 missiles, we need to shoot 500. It was like 300 missiles, and it was like 100-something missiles, like 300 to 100 drones. I forget the exact combination, but a combination of different weapons. But they might have to go further because of what these hardliners are calling for. And then from there, the Israelis feel like maybe they want to go further. And then we could get in a situation where there's tit for tat, tit for tat, tit for tat strikes. And then before you know it, the Iranians could be triggering Hezbollah to engage in a massive strike campaign, maybe trying to ship more stuff to the Houthis to try to engage them more. And we can see the situation quickly spiral out of control as Iran's full axis of resistance is triggered. And the Israelis, in response, are striking locations in Syria, striking locations in southern Lebanon, striking locations in Iran, striking locations, continuing to strike locations in Gaza, continuing to do raids in the West Bank. Dominoes, dominoes, dominoes. We don't want the situation to spiral out of control. I cannot emphasize enough. It is the interest in all parties. It is in the interest of all parties to de-escalate the situation, to avoid a full-blown regional war. The United States, if anything, does not want another Middle Eastern war, does not want to certainly involve itself directly in another U.S. Middle Eastern war when we have troops in the region that could be at threat under said scenario. The Iranians, I don't think, want a war. I don't think the Israeli public, and I don't think they want a war with Iran. The Israelis have their hands full enough as it is. And I think the Iranian public much more wants to deal with the problems they have internally than necessarily go in a giant regional war. I mean, if this goes into a regional war, here's another question, and this is just brought up by Gutter Chat too. Jordan helped intercept the missiles headed towards Israel. The United States and Great Britain did. But will these powers help Israel if this does spiral out into a full-blown war? Will they take advantage of the situation to get on Israel's side to try to kneecap their strategic opponent, even though the spiral out would be in large part due to the Israelis as well? Or also during, of course, the war on the Gaza Strip. I don't know. I don't have an answer to that question. I'm just posing it because it's a question that has to be asked by someone, hopefully someone with more knowledge of the region and more diplomatic ties in the U.S. government. I think Jordan says that they only did it out of protection of their own sovereignty and borders. And that's another question. There's a good chance that these missiles that are going to be fired at Israel or could be fired at Israel, we're still, we don't know for sure with how the Iranians are going to respond, are going to cross over their airspace again. So this might not even just include, again, the Israelis and the Iranians, or even just the Iranian proxies, but other Gulf states as well. Either because they're directly intercepting it, and then the Iranians, maybe they'll get mad and try to start beef with them as well, or maybe they take advantage of the situation, which would be, of course, difficult to do domestically due to the fact that Israel is just so unpopular in Saudi Arabia, so unpopular in Jordan, not really popular anywhere in the Middle East. And we are just in between a rock and a hard place. Up shit creek without a paddle, I think is the expression. My goodness, I wish I had more to talk about, and I could engage in more speculation. But here's the question that I am thinking. If this continues to spiral, considering that the Israelis didn't even warn us before they struck the consulate, and they said they didn't think it would be a point of escalation. Rubbish. Nonsense. If they did it, then they have no sense about themselves at all. Will the United States involve themselves directly here, or will they tell the Iranians, we're not involved here. Your business. I mean, it's hard to imagine Joe Biden not trying to intercept missiles. So, I mean, that would be directly involving the United States and interfering with Iranian strike plans. But there's also not direct strikes in Iran or direct combat with Iranian troops. And plus, if you're the Iranians and you want to go to a back and forth tit for tat with Israel, would the smart strategy be to just try target everything and all of your rivals? Or would the smart strategy be to try to isolate Israel, to tell the United States, you want to sit out of this? You want your troops in the region targeted? Fine, sit to the side. We're just going to go back and forth. It's not like the United States hasn't done that before. When the Israelis invaded southern Lebanon, Ronald Reagan called the Israeli president and said, that looks like a Holocaust. Real words. We're not getting involved, and we're canceling the fighter jet program. Oh, outgoing flights from several Iranian airports canceled. Iranian state media Press TV is reporting outgoing flights from several Iranian airports have been canceled. All flights going to Tehran, Isfahan, and Shiraz, these are the three cities that there were reported strikes in, had already been suspended. The director of Iran's public relations for an airport company announced in an interview with state-run Mir TV. My gosh. I gotta say, the Nothing Ever Happens crowd are probably doing like a Shirayama, like Last Stand right now. Last Samurai stand. Dylan, is this World War III? Let me just say this again, because I said this earlier. Likely not. There's still points of de-escalation, but when it comes to like flying close to the sun, this is the closest for the entire conflict that they have flown to the sun. I still think the odds are against it. I still think there's multiple ways to de-escalate from here. But no, I don't think it's World War III. Also, there could be a war between Israel and Iran, or at least a big fighting, like shooting missile war, if you want to call it that. It's not ground troops and stuff. Without it being World War III. There was a war between, there was a Six-Day War without it being World War III. There was a war between Israel and Hezbollah without it being World War III. There's been multiple wars without it being World War III in the region. And so even if it was a war, the idea that it would necessarily be World War III, because America would just throw itself into involvement, and then other regional powers would world powers would throw itself into involvement. The Russians aren't going to get involved. I don't think the Chinese are going to get involved. I mean, the Russians might get involved only in the idea of like intelligence transfers and weapons, weapons share, not even weapons sharing. They're kind of busy, But I think that even if there was a war, the idea that people are jumping straight to World War III, to me, seems like fear-mongering for attention. It was fear-mongering for attention a week ago, and it's still, in my opinion, fear-mongering for attention. There's still risk of war. It is, again, the closest to the sun we've flown, but don't let the grifters take you for a ride. Don't let the grifters take you for a ride. It's in the self-interest of all these states not to engage in a wider regional war. But that's the self-interest of the states, not necessarily the interest of the individuals, which is the thing that worries me. And not to mention, states don't always make rational decisions, because states are made of human beings, and human beings are not perfectly rational beings, are they? I'm not a realist. Definitely not a pure realist. Take the L, Hassan was right. Oh, God. Oh, King, how I ever doubted you. Your thumbnails were not fear-mongering at all for attention, as viewership goes down, down, down. No. It was just a prophecy. Hassan has eyes that can see the future. What a wild headline on that, by the way. What a wild headline. Read theory, watch his video. True. Man, I don't really have much more to say here. I think I've already said everything I want to say. It's not in the interest of no one for a regional war. De-escalate, de-escalate, de-escalate. And the United States should, if there is a war, the United States should do everything they can to limit the war and limit the war scope. Oh, we have another update. Multiple explosions heard near military base, semi-official news agency says. Iranian semi-official Fars News is reporting that 3 explosions were heard near the military base where fighter jets are located in the northwest part of the city of Isfahan. Okay, so I was talking about the nuclear element to it. I might have jumped the gun a little bit. We'll have to wait still a little bit. Because it could be they tried to strike some nuclear assets and then they strike some airport assets. We'll just have to wait. Again, speculation. The defense is activated in response to an object that is likely to be a drone, sources tells Fars News. It has been said that the Army radar was one of the possible targets, and the windows of several office buildings were broken in the area. The cause of the blasts are not yet known. Reports of the explosion comes hours after Iran's foreign minister, Hussein Amir Abdullah, told CNN that if Israel takes any further military action against Iran, its response would be, and I quote, immediate and at the maximum level. Well, if you verbalize it like that, it's kind of hard for you to go down the ladder, if not at the very least meet the Israelis with another strike on Israel.